Welcome back to the Hopkinson Arts Podcast. I'm your host, J. Edward Britton. Before we get started, I wanted to thank everybody who follows and supports the Hopkinson Journal for the Arts. We're currently doing a crowdfunding campaign, and all your financial contributions, as well as your general support, are helping us reach our goal of highlighting underrepresented views and making the arts a space where intellectual diversity is welcome. To learn how you can support the Hopkinson Journal for the Arts, visit our website or stay for the end of the podcast. In today's episode, I interview music composer Laura J.H. Ball. After I introduce Laura, we discuss her upbringing and what brought her to music, her view on education, her opinions on the culture war and conservatives in the arts, and how she came to overcome her personal ailments to become an exceptional artist. To learn more about Laura, you can visit her Facebook and YouTube pages. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hi everybody, welcome to the Hopkinson Arts Podcast. Today I'm joined by Laura J.H. Ball, a music composer and landscape design business owner from Virginia. So before we get started here, Laura, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and about how you got into the arts and into composition and all that?
Sure. First of all, hello everybody. I'm really glad to be launching this podcast series, and I really hope that you continue to tune in and follow the Hopkinson Journal. I think this is a really exciting project. So to the question, I was born in 1974 in Washington, D.C. So technically I've been 29 several times over.
We're just going to go straight to the start of it all. What house, what hospital were you born in? You know?
Oh, wow. You're going way back. I was born in Sibley. Hey, no, I have to answer this now you ask. Okay. I was born in Washington, D.C. proper at a hospital called Sibley. Okay. Yeah, Sibley Hospital in D.C. I spent my first 2 decades stuck in Beltway traffic. On the way to a music lesson or a theater production, it was always breathing in somebody's exhaust fumes. So even the day, a couple days after I was born, when they let me go home, I was stuck in traffic.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, well,
that's why wholesome, yeah.
That's why I'm not in Washington, D.C. anymore.
Right.
So I attended a really well-funded high school called Walter Johnson High School in Rockville, Maryland, which actually really worked out great for me because their music and theater programs were top-notch. And I'm assuming that their funding went more toward that than our football program, because our football program was horrible since the day that my mom went several years prior to me. So we were probably the only high school that didn't have a marching band because it didn't merit it.
I actually know what that's like. Actually, I went to a performing arts school in Central Florida, and we had to participate in the marching band extravaganza in order to receive a certain degree of funding, but we also didn't do marching stuff because we were very bad at it, and we didn't have the funding to get the costumes and stuff or whatever they like march in. So we just did standing band, where everybody dressed in concert black. We all went to the center of the football field, and we just played marching band music without marching. We just stood there. And everybody disliked us because we played well, sure, but we didn't march. And so it wasn't very exciting to watch.
You weren't fun to watch. So
No.
You were essentially like ours. We had a pep band, which I guess means that you play music exuberantly and try to pretend like you're happy to be there. But, so anyway, we had a wonderful music program, and I think that was a wonderful start, even though I wasn't entirely sure that was a venue I was going to be taking on professionally.
Right.
I had always heard that musicians were dirt poor, and I didn't want to be dirt poor, even though I was really good at it.
Well, so I'd like to expand on that thought.
Sure.
We are dirt poor. Okay, you can keep going. We're absolutely, there's actually not that much expansion on this. It's just we're dirt
for yourself. Okay, well, part of the reason why I think that and this is going to be a hot take, so I'll just go ahead and make everybody hate me straight off. I really don't think that music composition and maybe performance, but composition, I really don't think is something that I would advise students to go into debt to learn. I really don't think that it's something I'm sorry.
Because I'm studying grad school in jazz composition right now.
Okay, well,
I had a conservatory.
You okay.
It's okay though. It's okay.
You've already done it. You're going to do just fine. But you said that you were okay with the fact that you were dirt poor.
Well, anybody working full-time in the arts has to accept certain facts, right? And one of those main facts is that you're not going to be wealthy unless you go by a very certain playbook or do a very specific thing or become Hollywood famous or something. So I've learned to accept that fact. And I think a lot of people have learned to accept that fact who very much love the arts in general. But yeah, music composers tend to not make much.
Well, maybe I should reframe that in that I don't think that it is necessary. I think that if it's something that you want to do and it's something that you're good at and you're going to specialize, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity and it's a wonderful journey. And you actually do wind up meeting an awful lot of people in your field and getting kind of a good launching pad. So
right.
For that point, I think that it's a wonderful journey. And you know what? I said that even though I went through the university system, and I would never trade that for the world.
Did you study composition formally?
I did. However, I think that, okay, so I studied composition and technology.
Yeah.
And I really did enjoy the heck out of myself. But somehow I think that music composition was something that came so naturally to me that my professors pretty much got out of the way. And they let me create without too much micromanagement. I didn't learn theory so much from the get-go in a way that would have affected my composition and my process. I learned it in as much as keeping it a background and maybe framework.
Well, lots of stuff in composition is trial and error, right? So whenever you're creating a new song, even if you can't identify the chord you're playing or the quality of the, I don't know, tone that you're playing, like there's still a lot of experimenting that goes into it anyways, right? So you're going to come out the other side just fine because you're going to come up with something good, even if you don't know exactly what it is that you're coming up with, right? So let me
expound a little bit so that, you know, because I appreciate the fact that we can, which I don't really find it a point of disagreement. I think that if you choose the path of university learning, follow through with it and follow through with it to the point where, you know, the money you're spending, you know, matters to you personally. Whether the output you're getting matters to you personally, and that you are setting yourself up in such a manner that, you know, you're not going to be thinking, well, you know, I can't buy a house right now because I'm paying off my college debt and I'm resentful of that. You know what I mean? So you don't sound like you're the type that will be resentful of.
Well, it takes planning, right?
Right.
It takes planning. And so like I've planned to like sort of have that sort of situation tossed at me, and like I'm also planning on how to deal with it. I think a lot of people don't plan ahead of time and they get stumped. They get confused whenever they're approached with, oh my gosh, I have all this debt and I don't know how to pay it off. And I don't have the job of my dreams either, because degrees don't get you the job specifically that you wanted for, right?
Part of what drove me to music composition was one, I did show a natural proclivity from a very early age. I mean, I'm talking 3.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had one of those little kid keyboards, and I would hide up in my room with my keyboard. And my grandmother caught notice of it, and she said to my parents, you know, she is showing a lot of proclivity for the arts, especially music. You know, so why don't you try to encourage this? And so they tried to send me to a fancy music studio in Bethesda, Maryland called Ellsworth Studios. Ellsworth Studios was kind of, I want to say it was one of those places where I believe they were trying to crank out cream of the crop. When they took me, I was 5 years old. And I was always the smallest in my class, very daintily built, and my hands are small and stubby. So they took me for piano lessons, and I remember one of the fellows coming out with a measuring stick, and he placed that over my tiny hands and took one disapproving look at it and said, you know, I don't think this is going to be a good match.
Wow.
I think nowadays that was a cop-out. I think that you can teach somebody to play piano even if they don't have hands.
Yeah.
Anyway, that turned into a wonderful adventure, actually, because they sent me on to a recorder teacher named Carol Rogentine. And I took lessons with her for probably until I was college bound at age 17. Even Carol noted that she didn't have to spend a lot of time with me. She just gave me the framework.
Right.
And then let me go. To my university education, the main reason why I went to a university, I went to a tiny private college down in the swamps of North Carolina.
Right.
If I mentioned the name, you wouldn't even recognize it, even though it used to be a conservatory many years ago. Nowadays, they go by St. Andrews University.
Okay.
A long time ago, they were a women's college and a conservatory. I studied at university because I was told that in order to find any success.
Right.
So I went and I studied really hard. And I was one of those people that I paid for my own education. I was fortunate enough to get some grants.
Yeah.
Graduated in 3.5 years. I thought, well, I just studied music composition. Now what?
I've been there. Oh, I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. Now what? So naturally what I did is I got married, because originally I went to school to get an education and then I found the love of my life there. So I got married and we decided just on a whim because we couldn't find any jobs because I was a music composition major and he was a graphic arts major. So we naturally moved halfway across the world to South Korea.
Wow. Well, I didn't know you spent time there.
We did. For 3 months, I taught English as a second language, basically to pay the bills.
The question is, did you learn any Korean?
I did. I know how to say.
Did you hold on to any of it?
A little bit. I know how to say 감사합니다. That's thank you. And annyeong is hello. Oh, I'm going to confuse my Chinese that I learned in high school. So yeah, I learned the basic. Yeah. And I knew when my students were talking about me because Sansangnim means teacher. And every time they said that, I would turn and cast them a glance. And that was enough to make them quiet.
Yeah.
So moving on to where the university education led me. A few extra things happened to me after school. I alluded to a little bit of the stress in my family. Without going into a lot of detail, there were situations that went on in my family that had very, very long lasting effects. And I didn't realize that my body was constantly in fight or flight for several years. So when I got out of my family home, I developed a chronic panic and anxiety disorder, which I thought was just a standalone disorder, but really it derived from CPTSD. With the constant fight or flight, I found it really, really difficult to focus. On top of that, I was diagnosed with Lyme's disease.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, but that wasn't the end.
Was this just from normal contraction, the way you would get it from like a tick or something?
They assume so. When I did decide to get it checked out, it was by the time that I was starting to show some of the neurological symptoms. On top of that, I also had a few accidents that resulted in 3 traumatic brain injuries. But if you've heard my music, you would be absolutely shocked to hear that I had ever suffered any of these issues, that I had a 15-year hiatus from composing.
And that's something I wanted to talk to you about, given your hiatus and given the long-term conditions that you've had to go through, right? Just how do you compose music in that condition? Like where, okay, like maybe you're not permanently disabled, but you're physically compromised. You can't move. You can't really do much. You have sort of permanent ailments, right? What's your advice to sort of people, especially composers in that situation that you were in?
So I'm thinking that, first of all, I do believe in God and I do believe in miracles.
Absolutely.
And nowadays that is a little bit counterculture. If you're faced with a physical malady that prevents you from doing what you love, you have to break it up into parts. Remember earlier I said that I felt that the studio that declined teaching me piano, I think it was a cop-out that they declined me because of the length of my hand.
Right.
Or length of
it
my
was
hands.
it was ridiculous is what it was. Right?
It's insanity. I mean, I've seen 2-year-olds play. Now, are they going to be playing Rachmaninoff too? No.
Right.
Not right away.
No, especially not. No.
Right, but can they play a scale? Can they play one note? Can they enjoy that note? So here's my simple thought: don't quit like I did, and I didn't really quit. I had to reset. Certainly, when you have traumatic brain injury, you have to do an awful lot of work to reconnect. I had to do an awful lot of therapy, neuro-restorative therapy. I worked with a functional neurologist. I worked with functional practitioners. My primary care is a functional practitioner who reset my diet. So I've put in my homework. And what I advise people to do is find a facet of what you love to do and focus on what you can do. So if you have no arms, use your toes. If you have no mouth, find a stringed or keyboard instrument. But just don't quit. If you have no motivation, start with something that maybe takes you 30 seconds to do and do it with all you can muster.
Yep.
At the time.
At the height of COVID-19, whenever no places were performing ever, I had a very difficult time having the drive to compose things. And so whenever I discovered that I was in Orlando at the time, and whenever the Orlando Jazz Orchestra opened back up, I immediately got back into composing things, right? So I wrote a tune for them that went very well. And so, yes, so for me, it's the communal aspect of the arts that really keep me going. So is that going to be a different drive for every single person, or do you have a sort of, not a sort of one size fits all solution, but a sort of solution that can work for most people?
Well, there really isn't a one size fits all solution because our psychologies are different. I appreciate the social aspect of music. You know, I appreciate going to see a performance because after all, you know, why am I composing if I don't want to hear it played? However, I also, one of my favorite aspects of composing is actually driven by my introversion. I really don't do it for the accolades. Larger social gatherings make me rather nervous. So I am motivated by the relationship, the almost magical dance between the composer and the performer. And that's very private.
Yes.
And that can be done. That can be done despite COVID. You know, that when I send a piece to a performer and they look at it and they find the magic in it that I do when I'm composing it, and they find parts and they go, ooh, measure 44 is my favorite part. And I think that's my child that this person is talking about. That's my art.
Yes,
so
yes.
Think about the fact that when you compose, it's not just for the audience, Jacob. It's for, you know, if you have a significant other, if you make a really good mock-up and your significant other is sitting there and listens to this and thinks, what an amazing talent, what an amazing person that I'm dating or married to. Okay, right. So there's one point of motivation that you can find.
And I think this is a great point on the beauty of the written score. There's a lot of people who say that the written score is obsolete or just a tool to get the sound across. But actually, the written score is an adventure that people, the composer, the audience, and the players participate in. It's this medium of existence, right? So whenever they view something beautiful on the page that's easy to play and simultaneously maybe complex or beautiful or meaningful, there's something exhilarating in that privilege that they get to play, right? And the privilege that you get to hear them enjoy playing it because of how it looks on the sheet, right?
So that's what I tell people. As I said, you know, people are like, well, I just want to write the music. And I said, I understand that. But nowadays, we don't, you know, Beethoven had copyists and, you know, his music went through several hands. Nowadays, considering the fact that we're all dirt poor because we're musicians,
Right.
I mean, I am making some commissions here, and it's nice, but that's, it's nice enough to pay off my Sibelius subscription.
Oh gosh, which is far too expensive, by the way.
Every month. Well, I mean, it's just the fact that if you were actually to sit down and think about how much money you're actually spending on the program without owning it, it would depress you. But anyway,
yeah, we officially lost our ability to be sponsored by Sibelius on this podcast. So
I do tell everybody, I said, just think about how miserable it is to try to read a book in which the font is too small, or it's, it lacks serif, and you don't have anything for your eye to grab onto. And so you just kind of have to reread a paragraph to understand what it meant. And so I said, music is the same. And especially in a place where the musicians are sight reading it. If they're having to sight read, like in film music, you better make sure that your score is very clear and pleasant to look at. Absolutely not.
Right. On the note of yearning for beauty, right? We also have the idea of something that I want to get that is very important to me, is the idea that it's more difficult for people to work together because of our modern day sort of culture war. I think it's very toxic what has happened, to where
absolutely
now we have musicians associating with each other based off of sort of tribalism. And so what are your thoughts on the sort of pros and cons of the intersection between music and politics? Because if we think about it, politics is everywhere. So now it's in music. So what do we do about it?
I absolutely despise the expected bifurcation of thinking. I hate being shoved into a box. And I thought that the arts originated as kind of a counterculture. But I can see so many reasons why music and other forms of art are an excellent communication platform, and therefore a perfect venue for getting a heterodox idea across in a less traditional manner.
Right.
However, I think where it becomes a problem is when audiences want an escape from the constant barrage of information, hyper-partisan bickering.
A big mistake that more conservative musicians and like performers made for a long time was anytime they wanted to sort of fight back against whatever status quo they were trying to fight back against, it was always here's a conservative project here, or this is the project for the conservatives, or the whatever. It would have some sort of thing in its name that sort of gave it away. Whereas and that's not just cringy, it's also very counterproductive, because up until very recently, progressive artists, which is the majority of artists, it's at least 80 to 90%, right? Progressive artists just think of themselves as artists. They just think, they just create projects, they just do things, they just start orchestras.
So here's the problem, Jake. It's that, so, all right, let's just boil it down. Why are people consuming art? Okay, so why did my dad sit down? Why did he plunk down in front of the TV to watch a football game? Why did he grab a bowl of popcorn and sit down in his comfy chair and turn on the football game? And then this used to confuse me so much. I have to watch my football, Laura. No interruptions. And he would sit in front of his TV and then go to sleep. And I thought, wait a minute. So if watching this football game was so important, then why aren't you actually watching it? So I figured it out. Most people at times, they live a difficult enough life at home. They have kids, and it's a constant barrage of stress and information, and they get home from work, they just want to throw their shoes off and do something different, which is not stress.
Right.
So I would say that most people, they go to an art show or a concert because they do, I'm not saying they don't want to stop thinking. I'm not saying they want to stop thinking. I'm saying that they just want a shift. And in our modern world, with social media barrage and a constant 24/7 news cycle, I'm saying that most people just want some popcorn and mindless entertainment, some kind of shift. And certainly a Vaughan Williams pastoral is not mindless. I'm not implying that art is mindless in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that they want to escape from harsh reality.
Yes.
And they want to shift their focus to the beauty that we can find in this world instead of the constant how do I put it? The constant
barrage. I don't know.
Barrage of political micromanagement.
Yes.
So, and even others, they'll attend a concert because they enjoy a challenge to the palate, such as Steve Reicher or Arnold Schoenberg.
Yeah, exactly. But
they still want that challenge to exist outside of the normal everyday drudge, as well as the idiotic glurge that they're exposed to constantly.
And I think you're right about the end result, but I feel like this is missing a huge step, which is that in order to get back there, you have to actually pick a side and then fight on that side, right? Fight on whichever side is right or accurate or truthful, right? I feel like whenever heterodox minded people or free speech advocates or conservatives want to fight back in the culture war, this is an awesome thing to do. They just got to know how to do it. We should start our own symphony orchestras, right? And then only whenever there's an even side, an even amount of options of people who are with your values, right, can we return to this sort of apolitical society of let's just go to a concert or like something like that, where we don't have to worry about whether or not there's things conflicting with
Jacob,
our
here's the problem. Just like it, because I agree with you completely. Okay. I think that we should just create art and let it speak for itself. Nobody's looking at my music and going, was that written by a conservative or at least I hope they're not. If they are, then they're not the audience I want. The way to fight back is to not participate. However, here's where I argue. And I'm not arguing for the sake of being petulant. I'm just saying that, for example, Afghanistan, this whole debacle we had with Afghanistan and the withdrawing, not many people that I talk to on the left or the right disagree that we should have eventually stopped trying to micromanage, that culture has been that culture for much longer than we've even, than the United States has existed. And their problems are just recycling themselves. And I think it's really, really, but here's where the problem is in the arts. Who's starting the fight? Okay. So I think we can have a partisan answer there. I do think that our country has made an awful lot of good strides, and we're just not being allowed to celebrate those right now for some weird reason. And so I start to think, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Well, celebration is looked at as complacency, to some extent, which I completely disagree with.
I'm not allowed to have a different viewpoint, so I'm just going to move on to something in which I keep my mouth shut. I'm going to go and become a swimmer, and I don't have to speak. I'm just gonna be underwater, the whole time, and nobody has to hear an opinion of mine, and then I'm safe. And that's a terrible place for anybody to be, including, and this is going to sound interesting, including the progressives. I think the progressives have every right to write a piece of music that speaks to their values.
The issue is no one is trying to dismantle their values, because that's part of the status quo. Like, I'd say most of my close friends are progressives just because of the places I've gone to college and had lived in. So I don't want to prohibit them from creating art, but at the same time, they're not being prohibited from creating art.
Well, I think if you're not directly, if your art is not directly breaking, a law or commandment. I mean, if your art is legitimately causing the death of somebody, I think you should reconsider.
Or it's just evil. I feel like if your art is evil, and not your definition of evil or someone else's, but really objectively evil, people do not actively and consciously politically discriminate. They think that they're holding themselves to reasonable standards for the safety and care of others by discriminating against generic and mild viewpoints. And we have to get out of that framework.
It goes along the same lines of, how do you help somebody the most? Do you give them a fish, or do you teach them how to fish? Right. Do you give somebody a thought, or do you teach them how to think? Okay. So I know it's difficult to trust individuals with difficult information because you want them to come to your conclusion. Right. So what the left is doing right now is they are requiring that everybody come to their conclusion by force. who passes the purity test is my question. If we're going to start purging art and artists, then by what standard are we purging them, and whose?
Right. And the scary part is nobody really gets to pass is the scary part. So, but on that note, so do you have any significant projects or works of your own that you would recommend to the listeners of today's show?
Okay. Well, first of all, I do have a YouTube page.
Right.
So I still need to do a lot of uploading on there. I've been busy composing instead of uploading. So I'm actually, okay, so because I only recently started composing again in the past 5 years ago,
right.
My catalog is not huge, but I do actually take my time and compose quality. And so one of my pieces that is my absolute pride and joy is my Fantasia on Personate Hodie, which was actually my very, very first full orchestral piece. I started it in 2020 during the pandemic, because I mean, what are you going to do in a pandemic when you're locked into your home? Compose an orchestral piece.
Yes, which is, by the way, what I did whenever I had COVID-19. I composed a symphony orchestra piece. Yeah, that's what I did.
Good for you. Yeah, well, okay, so here's the story behind that a little bit. So it is called A Fantasia on Personate Hodie. I think my publisher is going to change that to just include the A, just Fantasia and Personate Hodie. But this piece has apparently put me on the map quite accidentally, especially being that it was my first foray into full orchestral writing. Another piece I'm really proud of is I have an 18-minute piece. It's kind of I want to say it's also a Fantasia, but it's a little bit more like a multifaceted, kind of multi-part composition sewn together. Mm-hmm. It's for string orchestra. It's called Ebb Tide. And I'm really, really proud of that because it was my first large piece, my first large undertaking. And that one actually got a lot of attention accidentally again. And I think that was part of my motivation to delve into the full orchestral writing. What I have to say, it may sound shocking to some people, but I've never been all the way cover to cover through an orchestration manual.
Oh, really?
But even my music mentors have found absolutely nothing to snipe about regarding the orchestration.
Good.
Or the voice leading. So
it's hard. Orchestration is a craft of its own, aside from composition. So that's very excellent.
And it's really funny because I actually was studying some Holst and John Williams at the time. So there's actually a few quotes in there almost, but it just works. So you can look for it in the Gusthold Music Publisher Library coming next year. I'm gobsmacked. I'm absolutely thrilled. And
awesome.
So to wrap up the whole thing, if somebody who recovered from 3 traumatic brain injuries, neurologic deficiencies from Lyme's disease and its resultant chronic inflammatory syndromes, mm-hmm. and CPTSD, if a person like that can write a full orchestral piece that is now being taken up for publishing and is going to be premiered by 2 orchestras, one of which being a local community orchestra called the Petersburg Symphony Orchestra. Mm-hmm. If someone like that can do it, don't let anybody tell you that your methodology is inadequate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you support our mission at Hopkinson Arts, please consider making a donation to our crowdfunding campaign via Indiegogo. The link can be found on our website, hopkinsonarts.com. I'll see you all in a month for our next interview.